Hello, and welcome to the DFS Coach Talk podcast. Today is Saturday, May 16th, and I'm joined by my good buddy from the 860 Santino, Caccone. How are we doing today, Sonny? It's beautiful out.
Yeah, we're doing well. It's another beautiful day out here. I know last night we had thunderstorm and tornado warnings, and it was pretty crazy with the rain, but it's beautiful today, and I can't wait to enjoy it after this.
Yeah, absolutely. You can tell like tank top weather. That's New England. We go from, raining and tornado warnings the night before to now it's about 78 degrees outside. Beautiful. Looks like one of the best days of the year so far. So, it's the light at the end of the tunnel. We're starting to get some beautiful days where, going outside for a walk and stuff. It's one of the things that I took for granted before, and now I'm really thoroughly enjoying. So I'm with you. I'm looking to get out there, but we're here today to continue our NFL breakdown. We got a pretty interesting team, the Chargers. We're going to be talking about them, breaking them down from the draft, we expect to kind of be starting quarterback this season for them, and a few good weapons that they've had. One that we're expecting to really break out and blow up and should be on everybody's radar if he's not already. So, we'll just jump right into it, Santino. We got a lot to get to. We try to keep these shows under an hour, so that can generally get off the rails when it's you and I, though. So we know that. So we're going to try to keep this one on track. I'll jump right into it, just kind of go over some of their numbers offensively and defensively from last season and their overall record. So the Chargers were 5-11 last season. They lost 6 of their last 7 games, though, so the wheels really fell off towards the end for them. Offensively, take everything that we say offensively right now with a grain of salt because they lost their starting running back and their starting quarterback. Both those positions changed for them, but they were 10th ranked in total yards with 5,879, 21st ranked in total points scored, 337. Passing, they ranked 10th in attempts, 597. 6th in yards, 4,426, 17th in touchdowns with 24, and 29th in interceptions with 20. Rushing, this is where they kind of struggled, was getting in between the tackles. 28th on the ground with 366 attempts. 28th in yards as well with 1,453 yards on the ground. 20th in overall touchdowns with 12. And they ranked 23rd in yards per attempt with 4.0. So, obviously the rushing yards, Melvin Gordon being there, and a lot of those passing yards, it was Philip Rivers. So we'll go into the defense, though, and pretty much almost an identical defense that they're bringing back, except for a few new noteworthy additions. And they were solid. They were rock solid all season long in defense, and that was kind of what anchored their team. 6th in total yards with allowing 5,009 total yards. They ranked 14th in points allowed with 345. As far as passing goes, defense, first in pass attempts against them, 464. So teams were a little bit more cautious throwing. And when we look at the yards, 3,204 yards allowed in the air. That's 5th best in the NFL. Touchdowns allowed in the air, 21, ranking 8th. And interceptions, the 11 interceptions total, 22nd best. And on the ground, 21st in rushing attempts. So they 429 rushing attempts against them. 18th in total yards on the ground against them, 1,805. Touchdowns on the ground against them, 15. That ranked 21st. And then yards per attempt against them was 4.2, ranked 15th. So we talked about a few noteworthy additions on defense and some subtractions on offense and just a little bit overall. But why don't you break down some of those additions, subtractions, coaching staff? Hit us with some of the good stuff over there, Santino.
Yeah, so on offense, we know that they lost Melvin Gordon. He missed a huge chunk of last season anyway because the whole holdout thing, but now he's officially gone. And they lost their franchise quarterback, Philip Rivers, who's been there for years now. He was the face of the franchise. Now they're moving to LA, and they have a new face of the franchise. We'll get to him soon, but Justin Herbert. On defense, they only mainly lost 2 big guys. They let go of Thomas Davis, and they lost Brown at linebacker position. But on the flip side, they replaced those 2 linebackers with Vigil and Jefferson. So, an upgrade there. Offensively, they added two guys to the line. You might know Trey Turner from Carolina, and they added a big left tackle in Brian Beluga, who is going to probably anchor this offensive line, and that's a huge addition for them. As long as he's healthy, that's a big upgrade for this line that sometimes struggled. And they also added 2 other stars, Linval Joseph, to their defensive line, And the biggest offseason addition, in my opinion, is going to add even more to this top 5, top 10 pass defense in Chris Harris Jr. You pair him up with Casey Hayward, and that's 2 lockdown corners. I'm going to fade most people going against the Chargers on their pass offense. Chris Harris likes the slot, so there is a possibility that a number 2 wide receiver could blow up on that in this. But yeah, those are their big ads, and they address some concerns there. And what I want to do is talk about the coaching staff a little bit. You broke down all their numbers, and the coaching staff is pretty much the same coaching staff they had last year, especially at head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. Head coach is Anthony Lynn again. Is his 4th year as the coach. Last year, in the last 3 years as coach of the Chargers, I almost said San Diego, still used to it, but as the coach of the Chargers, he's been top 10 in pass yards all 3 years as a passing offense, and top 10 in defensive pass yards against all 3 years. Again, it shows it's very weird. You can run on this team, but you can't really pass on them. They brought in. He's not a new offensive coordinator, but he took over the job in Week 9 last year, kind of when Melvin Gordon returned. But Shane Steichen, he's going to be the offensive coordinator full-time this year. Last year, they were top 5 passing offense in net yards per game when this guy was under center or as the offensive coordinator. They were top 5 in pass yards and top 5 in pass yards per attempt. When in their rush offense, when Shane took over as the offensive coordinator, they improved by 42.6 yards per game. Most of that's going to be attributed to getting back Melvin Gordon, obviously a supremely talented back. But that's the 3rd highest increase in the NFL when this guy took over the job. So that's something to keep an eye on. And then Gus Bradley's their defensive coordinator. He's been a top 10 pass defense. It's a theme in this team all 3 years. In the last 2 years, he's been a top 10 in yards against. So it's not a defense you really want to attack, but especially without a Rivers who has the tendency to turn the ball over a lot. And give up unfavorable positions to the defense. It's something that we want to keep an eye on.
Yeah, you said a whole lot of good stuff there. I mean, you touched on the addition at left tackle. That was one of their weak spots. When you talk about, Rivers' turnovers, a lot of that was this guy was under pressure constantly. He always seemed like he was tucking and throwing last season. So I think that's probably one of the bigger additions. And then you talk about on the defensive side, Chris Harris, notorious lockdown corner. You talk about an already picture-perfect secondary, getting one of the best corners in the league. We're not targeting them often in the secondary. And as far as when you touched on the change in the offensive coordinator midseason and how the rushing completely changed after that, yeah, I think a lot of that could be attributed to Melvin Gordon. I also think a lot of it's attributed to Wisenhunt when he's always been a guy that airs it out. He's been notoriously known to air it out. And then once you see that immediate change, we saw obviously Melvin Gordon did have a big impact, but they focused on the running game a lot more. And I think that was part of the reason for the change is that they couldn't establish a running game early on in the season and really struggled with it. And we could say Melvin Gordon, but Eckler's pretty good in between the tackles himself. Career stats, yard per carry has always been up there. I think last season was his lowest yards per carry, but that could also be because of that offensive line and just the run scheme. I mean, a lot of teams probably shied away from him. They didn't stack the box against him too often because they were throwing 3/4 of the time. So that's a lot of good stuff you said right there. And I think that's just a perfect segue to start talking about this quarterback battle that we're going to see early on. So we know that they took Herbert 6 overall. We know that that's probably mostly attributed to the fact that this team's kind of built ready to compete right now. The Chargers understand that they're not going to have probably a top 6 or top 7 pick for the next few years if this defense can stay the way it is, and they pretty much have locked down a lot of their offensive weapons for a little bit too. So they couldn't pass up on Herbert. It's a guy that they wanted to say. Now, me and you, I think, are both in agreement with that. We do not think that they're going to throw him into the fire. Simply because they have a very capable starting quarterback already on the roster. And we're going to start with him, and that's Tyrod Taylor. So Tyrod, really no numbers to go off of last season. The year prior, not a lot of numbers to go off of either. Little time in Cleveland. But we'll talk about his 2017 season, and I think that's probably the best sample size that we can go off of because that's the last time that he was actually a starting quarterback. Started 14 games for him, went 8-6 for the Bills. He's 30 years old this season too. So I'll break down his numbers real quick from the 2017 season while he was in Buffalo, where he had 420 pass attempts for 263 completions. That's a 62.6 completion ratio or percentage for 2,799 yards. This is probably going to be your favorite stat here, Santino, and it should be everybody's favorite stat, a 14-4 touchdown to interception ratio. And he actually led the league in interception percentage. Only a dead even 1% of his passes were interceptions. So, he's a very smart decision. He's maybe not the most accurate quarterback, and I think that's a very misleading thing when people see, a touchdown interception ratio. Doesn't necessarily mean you're the most accurate quarterback, but he's a great decision maker. He knows when to tuck. He's not necessarily a guy that's afraid to run. He's not going to be Lamar Jackson, but he knows when to run, when to tuck it, and when to throw the ball away. And that's, I think, something very important. And he was 89.2 was his QBR. And then we'll talk about the ground numbers because he is effective on the ground. 84 rushing attempts that season for 427 yards, 4 touchdowns, averaged 5.1 yards per attempt. So I know you're a big Tyrod Taylor guy, and I think, like I said off the rip, we're both in agreement that he should probably be the starter and it's going to be his job until he loses it. But why don't you break down some of your expectations for him and what it would be if he, let's say, started all 16 games?
Yeah, so he should start, especially with what we think will be a shortened or abbreviated offseason, which it already is starting to look like that. Justin Herbert's just not going to get the playbook, not going to get the reps, and not going to get the practice time in this offense to familiarize himself to start day one. Tyrod Taylor was on this team last year, so he is familiar. But it's funny because it's a similar situation to where he struggled 2 years prior in Cleveland. First round draft pick at quarterback. He's the bridge option. He knows that. And will he be better? I think this is going to be a little bit different for him. He struggled during his time in Cleveland, but he still had them at a 1-1 record. I mean, it's pretty much been the par for the course every time this guy starts. His career record in Buffalo, those 3 seasons prior, was 22-20. He got them into the playoffs when they haven't been there in years before. He's a solid, if not spectacular, option at QB who is capable of winning games and leading a team to the playoffs as he did. If I personally want him to start all 16 games because it's better for fantasy. It's better for his fantasy game than Herbert's because, as you mentioned, he's very risk averse. He doesn't turn the ball over a lot, and he has that potential on the ground. If you look at all three years he started in Buffalo, he was a top 15 fantasy quarterback every year. That's not saying he's great, but that's not saying that's not bad. A lot of people can't say that distinction, and that's especially a guy that, especially in DFS, he's going to be among the bottom 5, bottom 10 price range at quarterback, and you're going to get upside on that. He's probably the most unsexy name in fantasy at the quarterback position, but he's cheap and he's very underrated because of that. Because he can score the ball, he gets you those extra points on the ground that he doesn't get through the air. And quarterbacks that can run, you get more points when you're running than your pass yards. So to me, I want him to start all 16 games because you're going to get a steal for him, especially in the beginning of the year. I think, I was going to say, I think 3,000 yards passing is well within his realm. If he gets 16 games, I say 3,600 yards passing and another 500, 600 yards on the ground, with probably around 17 to 20 touchdowns passing and 6 to 10 on the ground. That's a fantasy friendly quarterback right there that you're not going to have to pay up for at all.
I'm right there with you. I think those are really, really relative numbers that we can actually almost expect, considering how much better his weapons will be, considering what he had in Buffalo when he was playing over there. I think he had, half a season of Sammy Watkins every single year because we know he wasn't playing 16, and outside of that, not much. So I'm looking forward to the weapons he has. I think one thing that we could, and I wanted to ask your opinion on this, and they'll have something in their playbook that they didn't really have last season. I think that they can really use is going to be just being able to run a couple of options. Phillip Rivers is not an option type quarterback. There is no fear of him in his legs. He kind of runs like a newborn deer. It's not the prettiest thing. So now they can actually run these options, knowing that they have a very effective pass-catching running back in Austin Eckler. They have a guy that can roll it out himself if he knows the play's not there, and they have so many good explosive receiving weapons. So I'm kind of looking forward to how they can utilize that. And if they're going to bring in some run-pass options for him, I think 500 yards on the ground is rock-solid expectation.
Yeah.
So, and then, I agree. I think it's all 16 games, and it would only do a benefit for Herbert, giving him that entire season to kind of learn that playbook, get some practice reps in. And listen, there's going to be some instances where it's Tyrod Taylor. He might go down for a game or two, and Herbert can step in there and kind of, get that starting nod real fast. But it's a very slippery slope when you let a guy, come in there, sixth overall pick, expectations. He already saw the job yanked out from him in Cleveland, but that was Baker Mayfield we were talking about.
Mhm.
That's the first overall pick. There's pressure there. There's not as much pressure to, yank your guy for the sixth overall pick. That seems like a great spot to let this dude learn, especially knowing that in the 2021 season, they're going to have a lot of names on the block that could be leaving. So,
Yeah.
we'll jump right into Justin Herbert, sixth overall pick, 6'6" kid. He was probably one of the best college comeback quarterbacks that we could talk about. I mean, he led a lot of fourth quarter drives. I'll break down his numbers real fast for us, though. 428 attempts for 286 completions, 66.8 completion percentage for 3,471 yards. That's 8.1 yards per attempt. 32 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 156.8 QBR. 4 rushing touchdowns. Most of those came in the final 2 games. He didn't really rush too much. Some things that I kind of notice about him, and it's that he does have legs. He didn't use them all throughout his 4 years in college. He really just started using them, like I said, in the last 2 games. He ran a 4.68 40. The dude's 6'6", and he's pretty quick, Sonny. I did not expect that when I was kind of looking up his numbers and breaking them down. And I think something else very notable is how much of an impact he had immediately. I mean, he was 19-4. He had a 19-4 touchdown to interception ratio as a true freshman. So, a guy that is not necessarily, he has an arm, he has a big arm, doesn't take a lot of chances, doesn't throw downfield too often. Struggled when he threw downfield. He kind of misses some of those big throws, but he's a very good game manager. It seems like right off the rip, he's a guy that does make some smart throws here and there. He's not afraid to check down, short completion type of guy. But why don't you talk about some things that you would expect from Herbert? Let's say opposite glass. Tyrod Taylor starts 1 and 3. How would that affect the offense as a whole? And what you're expecting from him once he does, or if he does get that starting nod.
Yeah, so if the team's losing, obviously they have more incentive to play Herbert. I'm hoping it's a different case because I would rather have Tyrod Taylor for being greedy in fantasy. Um, but yeah, Herbert's a big prototypical size at quarterback, 6'6", 240. That's just massive specimen. He in college he got better every year, which is something that's you want to see when you're a young quarterback. He recognized the defense really well, and he made the right reads a lot of the time. Like you said, he didn't have the biggest arm, but he has a big arm if he needs it. He's pretty fluid in his motions, and the one factor that I kept hearing about it is he's going to be playing in LA in the Chargers. They need a new face of the franchise. They relatively don't have a fan base at the moment there. The Rams kind of stole their thunder going to the Super Bowl when they all moved. But this guy's supposedly an introvert, and I don't know how that'll play in LA because, as we know, the La La Land is you need to have a big personality if you play in New York or LA or even Chicago. Any of these major markets, they want you. They want people who just go out there and the fans can love. We'll see how that factors into it, but if this guy comes out and produces right out of the gate, then he's going to everybody's going to gravitate towards him. I mean, his only competition in LA would be Jared Goff now, and we know what Jared Goff is pretty much. But Justin Herbert is that big size, and not too many rookies go into a team that has weapons around you. We're going to get to Austin Eckler. This receiving core they have, Keenan Allen's a top 15 wide receiver every year he's healthy. Mike Williams is a big dude. Hunter Henry's a top 10 tight end. There's a lot of weapons for him to succeed if he does. If he played, say he played a full 16 games, I can see him putting up over 3,500 yards. I mean, 3,000 yards really isn't that much anymore, and it's very easy. I can see him doing similar to a Daniel Jones without the turnovers and without the attempts, because this team wants to play to their strength, which is their pass defense. They struggled against the run, but if they can control the ball, they want to slow down the game, have a grind it out, battle it out, 2017 type games to win. And I think he could be able to game manage. He won't be asked to lead lead the team to wins, kind of like Phillip Rivers had to do a lot. But he won't. He'll be able to play to his strengths and make the right reads, just like Tyrod Taylor, I think, will be able to do as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably exactly what they'd be expecting from him. This is a team that wants to play with a lead right now. Let's be real; like, they have one of the best pass defenses in the NFL. They want you to throw against them. I know. I see you laughing, and yep, that's my wonderful girlfriend in the background. One bedroom apartment, Santino. So, so there's one office, and happy wife, happy life. She generally runs the show. I'm not afraid to own that one right there. So I get segregated to the living room, and that's where I am forced to stay at this point. So I practically live in here. I got my own setup in the living room on the coffee table, but
Nice.
it works. Yeah, I read the same thing about Herbert though. He was never very a vocal guy in the locker room. A lot of his teammates have said that he's very hush hush, very quiet guy. Kind of just goes out there and does his business. And I also read that he had a little bit of footwork issues as well. That was something that was notable. So those are the things that you're okay with when you take a guy like that and you have a capable quarterback in front of him. It might have been a little bit more of a factor if they were expecting him to start right now. And I think that's kind of indicative to what we can expect. They're not expecting him to start right now, but we'll keep it moving. And you touched on him. You said his name, Austin Eckler, one of the guys I was most excited to talk about when I saw that we were going to be breaking down the Chargers, because I think he's becoming a household name. If you're a fantasy player, if you're a DFS player, he's definitely somebody that we could see probably compete as a top 5 back this season. Overall back, he's a 3-down back. Last season, we'll break down his attempts, rushing, and I think we have to almost kind of break it into 2 categories, and it's receiving, because there's not many guys that can do what he does. Only 132 rushing attempts last season. A lot of that cut short by Melvin Gordon ending his holdout, coming back for 557 yards, 3 touchdowns, averaged 4.2 yards per carry. Believe it or not, still pretty good, but one of the lower marks of his career. And then at receiving, had 108 targets, 92 receptions, 993 yards, 8 touchdowns. He averaged 62.1 yards per game receiving, and that's 9.2. I'm sorry, let me make sure I read that right. My 7s look like 2s. 9.2 yards per target. 27 total broken tackles, played 57% of the snaps. And again, I'll touch on Melvin Gordon's numbers just so you guys can get that into comparison. Eckler had 132 carries. Gordon had 162 carries for 612 yards, 8 touchdowns. So I think you know where we're getting at in this. I'll pass it over to Santino and let him say it. I'm expecting a big season from Austin Eckler, especially knowing that they are kind of transitioning from a pass-heavy offense to more of like a rush-heavy offense right now. It just seems like it's the way that they're going with a young quarterback and Tyrod Taylor, not a big pass volume type guy. I'm excited about this guy, Santino. How are you feeling about him?
I mean, you said you think he's a top 5 back. He was the number 7 running back last year, so it's not far off. And there was Melvin Gordon for half the season. So I know I'm excited about him as well, but I know that everybody else is going to be excited about him also. It's not going to be one of those things that just creep up on you. And if it does, I don't know where you've been the last
Got
year
your
and a
head
half.
buried in sand, yeah.
But in 2018, before he became the starter for a few games, he had 958 scrimmage yards on 145 touches. That's awesome. And then last year, 1,550 scrimmage yards on 224 touches and 17 touchdowns combined in those 2 years. This guy can get in the end zone as a part-time player as well. 17 touchdowns, that's nothing to sneeze at. So you know that his floor, he had 11 touchdowns last year. His floor is probably double-digit touchdowns, a ton of receptions. You said it, 92 catches on 108 targets. That's over 85% catch rate. Wow. This guy, he went from he is a 5'10", 200-pound, smaller, shifty scat back, but he's going to get a heavy workload this year. And even if he didn't get that heavy workload, even if Melvin Gordon's still there, he's still a top 15 option. Like he is a very good player. He's pretty much James White, but a lot better, and who can actually run the ball as well in between the tackles. And that's going to be someone that you're going to have to pay up for this year. Maybe the first couple weeks of the season in DFS, his price is low because no one's catching on to it yet. And if that's the case, he's going to be in all my lineups because that's just someone I know that has a safe floor. He's going to get a lot of touches, and he's very, very productive with those touches, whether it's through the ground, through the air. He scored touchdowns in both of those scenarios. But yeah, you mentioned it. He played only 57% of the snaps total last year. A lot of room to jump that into at least the 70s, and he was already a top 10 back. I mean, with the playing time increase and more roles and probably or more touches, probably a feature role without Gordon. The sky's the limit for this guy. He could easily jump into the top five, like you said. He wasn't far out of it last year, and only 200 and how many touches? Just a little over 200. Yeah, this guy is someone you want to target early and often before his price range jumps through the roof.
Absolutely. And I think he's probably a guy that is way more valuable in DraftKings where it's a PPR site. It's bottom line. But you hit the nail on the head, dude. There's not a lot of competition behind him. We'll get to Justin Jackson. You're going to talk about him in a minute. But, Justin Jackson's not a guy that they're going to, make sure he gets his. There's a reason why they let Melvin Gordon walk. They had this kid behind him, and they gave him some money. They plan on using him. He's going to be probably the biggest focal point of their offense when we're talking about the most fantasy sustainable option week in and week out. And he works in any sort of game script as well. If they playing from behind, he's going to get his receiving workload. If they're playing from ahead, he's going to grind out the clock. I would expect 8 touchdowns, possibly more on the ground, probably another 5 or 6 in the air. This kid's an absolute stud. We're looking at probably close to 2,000 all-purpose yards. We just saw McCaffrey do that last season, one of the only running backs that was able to do that. And this guy's going to step right in there and has a chance to do better than what McCaffrey just did. This coming from a Panther fan. I would not be shocked if he has a better season than McCaffrey did last season. And just think about how good McCaffrey was for DFS and for fantasy. We're talking about a guy that averaged, I think, at least 5.7 or 6 more fantasy points per game than the number 2 running back. I think sky's the limit for him. I said top 5 before we got on air. I said top 3, and I just said right now I wouldn't be shocked if he's the best running back for fantasy and for DFS this season. So I love him. Did we say it enough?
I don't think he's going to score over 20 touchdowns like McCaffrey did last year and get 2,400 scrimmage yards. But I see where you're coming from. I think McCaffrey had 19, but I see where you're coming from. He should be, if he gets this workload, which we expect he should be getting, he should be a top 5 back. That you're looking at names, and if you go by name value and who is the sexiest of those names, kind of like I mentioned Tyrod Taylor, he's not going to be in the top 10 for you. But if you go on production and expected production and a guy who's really not going to get out of the lineup if he's producing, because he is that third down back, and if he's producing in between the tackles, I kind of like Justin Jackson, but if he's producing in between the tackles, he's going to get that workload. And he's probably a top 20 pick in season-long leagues. DFS, I'm going to target him early and often until that price jumps up to a Christian McCaffrey-like level or the top 5 price range, which it's probably going to if he starts off this hot.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning that they play the Bengals week 1. Very easy matchup. So that's the kind of matchup that we can easily see him just grinding out the clock as they're going to have the lead. It's going to be a very, very tough walk-in for Joe Burrows to go against his secondary. So I'm not expecting a whole lot from the Bengals. I expect it to pretty much be a blowout, I would say like one of those 34-7 type games. But we'll see. And then they get the Chiefs in week 2. So that's a game where he's going to be probably targeted early and often and have a lot of volume in the passing attack there. So, we'll transition to Justin Jackson. You were just talking about liking him. Definitely going to see a bigger role in this offense this season with Melvin Gordon gone. I'm sorry. But now, a guy that he's clearly the number 2 back, but he's going to be involved. I just talked about how this team wants to run a little bit more this season, how they're probably transitioning more from a pass-heavy team to more of a 50-50 split, if not 60-40 rushing. So why don't you talk about Justin Jackson a little bit and what you're expecting from him?
So I expect a bigger role this year for him. Obviously, last year we thought the same thing when Gordon was holding out, but he missed his chance. He got hurt, and then he was just ineffective. And Ekeler went off that first game with 4 touchdowns. It just took the job and the bull by the horns there. But again, no Gordon. He should have a decent role. Last year he had 29 carries, but 9 of them were first downs. So he has the ability to get those short yardage situations, and he might be the goal line back here. he's not a big guy, but he's similar to Austin Eckler's size. I think he's 5'9", or no, he's 6 foot 199, so pretty much similar size. But he could take a lot of the between the tackle stuff if he starts off hot. I think I think he's going to get overlooked, and in season long leagues, he's a guy I'm going to look at. DFS, not really. I want to see him in his role first and foremost. See, maybe in the game, like you mentioned, the first week of the season against the Bengals, which we expect them to blow out the Bengals. Burrow's not going to really have a good team to throw against in his first game when Casey Hayward and Chris Harris Jr. on the side. So maybe Justin Jackson gets some extra work in garbage time, but I wouldn't sleep on him. In 2 seasons, he has 406 total yards rushing. Not anything to sneeze at, or not anything that you're going to wow you, but 200 yards of that 406 have come after contact. So this guy is he can break tackles. He's a big bruiser with elusive ability. And that's someone you want when you're running down the clock and you're controlling the ball. You want to hit the defense in the mouth. You want to every play, you want to hit him and hit him and hit him. And this is a guy who, more so than Austin Eckler, who could do that. And I just think he is pretty good upside if he gets the chance. I'm not going to go actively target him. He's not a guy I'm going to reach for in season long leagues, but he's a guy I wouldn't be surprised if he had a pretty good season. And then they brought in Josh Kelly. I don't really see him competing much. Maybe he'll mix here and there on first and second down, but he's probably going to mix in with Justin Jackson. One of those two could take over, get more of the playing time. But Austin Eckler is hands down the number one guy on this team, and then everybody else is going to fill in behind that. If they have good seasons, yeah, they'll get some extra carries because this team wants to control the ball. But if Austin Eckler is doing his thing as he's been doing the last 2 years, it's going to be him.
Can you just say Eckler for me one more time?
Eckler.
You Eckler?
Yeah, I like it. Eckler.
General Eckler, like General Ekbar. All right, I like that.
Flat. That was flat.
Yeah, we don't. I got to get the soundboard where I can get the studio laugh going. That would probably help me out a little bit more. I know you're not going to give me the studio laughs. You love to let me know when one of my jokes fall flat. But we'll transition right into the receivers because I'm kind of with you. I mean, Kelly's probably going to have like a role that Jackson had last season at best, unless Jackson just falls flat on his face, completely struggles, or one of these running backs get hurt. Is probably the only way that we're going to really see a lot of field times for him. Not a guy that had a real great profile either coming into the draft. So we'll go right into the number one option, Keenan Allen. Last season, he's just, as sure as it's going to be a hot day in Texas, as Keenan Allen's going to be just their go-to receiver. He moves the chains for him. He's been Phillip Rivers' favorite target for the past few seasons when he's healthy. Last season, target machine, 149 targets for 104 receptions, 1,199 yards. Probably would have expected a few more yards for him, but that's mostly, I think, due to Phillip Rivers getting sacked and not being pressured. I mean, this guy had no real time to throw. A lot of the routes were designed short throws just to kind of get 6-7 yards. 6 touchdowns, 69.8 catch percentage. A guy notably known for his hands. Did have 7 drops last season. Out of his 1,199 yards, 374 of those came after the catch. And then he was one of their best red zone threats as well. He had 20 red zone targets for 13 catches. So I don't know if we could say much about Keenan Allen. What we're expecting from him this season, probably what we're expecting from him every season. I would say maybe we could take into account a little less volume, just because I think all the receivers are going to have a little less volume, but he's still going to be the best target in the air for them. But anything else you want to add about Keenan Allen?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing, Phillip Rivers, he was his guy. I expect him to be the number one option again. He's been a top 15 wide receiver the last 3 years, reliable as they come. Pro Bowler the last 3 years. You mentioned his stats last year. That's pretty much on core of his averages over those 3 Pro Bowl seasons. 148 targets is his average, 101 receptions, 1,263 yards, 6 touchdowns. I mean, yeah, this guy is very good. Last year he had 10 games with double-digit targets. I don't know if we'll see that again this year if they play the style of play that they kind of want to do. But if they have to air it out, and that's something that they might have to do if they're giving up a ton of yards on the ground, because that's something that they struggled with. I see him getting all those targets again. He is the chain mover on this team. He is the guy in between the 20s. He's not going to be the red zone option. He never is, but He's an elite possession guy, and he's always open. He always got open for Philip Rivers, and I
Great
think
route runner.
Tyrod Taylor and Justin Herbert are gonna love how he gets open for them as well. I mean,
Yeah, I think he's one of the best route runners in the league. I think that's makes it so easy for him to get open. He's always been a great route runner. So, I wouldn't call him a complete no-show in the red zone. 20 red zone targets was one of the, team high. So, I think a lot of that was attributed to Mike Williams' struggles, which we'll also get to in a minute. But, you hit it. It's copy and paste for Keenan Allen for every season production. You just hit copy, you hit paste. That's what you're projecting is what he gets every single season. Just the go-to guy. But Mike Williams, a little bit of a different story. Kind of a guy I'm excited to talk about because I think there's some underlying things that a lot of people are going to overlook. Big guy. It's going to be his third season. Ran a 4.49. Big Mike Williams, 6'4", guy, ran a 4.49, so he does have some speed too. He had 90 targets last season, Santino, but only 49 receptions for a good amount of yards though. 1 yard over the 1,000 mark, 1,001 yards. And this is the unique stat. He led the league in yards per reception, 20.4. Only 2 touchdowns, which is surprising. I think a lot of people were expecting more considering he had 10 in 2018. 54.4 catch percentage, only 187 yards after the catch, which I thought was a little surprising when I started looking at his numbers. Which leaves 814 yards before the catch. And I wanted to talk about the red zone because that was 10 touchdowns 2018. I don't want to steal all the thunder with the fun stats, so I'll throw them over to you in a second. But he had 16 red zone targets last season, only 3 red zone catches for 18.75 red zone catch percentage. One of the worst considering how many targets he had. Year prior, though, this is the year that I think this is what we're going to be indicative of. This is like the telltale stat is that I think we're going to get back to some normalcy this season. In 2018, 15 red zone targets, so 1 less red zone target than he had in 2019 for 8 receptions, 7 touchdowns, 53.3%. So he could do it. He struggled last season. Again, I think a lot of this pass offense, while they put up good numbers, they could have been so much better. Philip Rivers turned the ball over a lot, and he was under pressure for a majority of the season as well. And a lot of that's also because they had to play from behind, so a lot of forced throws. But I broke down the numbers, and I want to hear what you think about Mike Williams. What are you expecting, more of a 2018 Mike Williams or more of a 2019 Mike Williams?
I'm expecting kind of the 2018 version of him. I know his rookie year he had 0 touchdowns. Last year he had 2. 2018 he had 10. I think he is the most reliable. He should be the most reliable red zone option on this team. He's the biggest guy. He can jump. And as you mentioned, he's a speed guy. He led the league. He was tied for the league lead with 8 plays of 40 plus yards. That's awesome. 17 plays over 20 yards. He is a big play guy. But again, they're not going to have Philip Rivers throwing the ball 600 times this year. They're having Tyrod Taylor and Justin Herbert, who won't air it out as much as Philip Rivers. Philip Rivers is never shy about taking his chances, even if his arm can't reach there. But I don't expect him to the 1,000 yards. I would expect him to do it if Philip Rivers was there. But in this new offense, I think 1,000 yards is harder for him. But those 2 touchdowns, that's an aberration. So is the 0. He was hurt his rookie year. I think he's going to be more of the touchdown maker, less of the big playmaker this year because of it. But I wouldn't be shocked if he still had like 5-6 plays over 40 yards because he is a burner. He could get behind the defense, and we know Keenan Allen usually doesn't do that. But and then they have Hunter Henry and Austin Eckler underneath. They need someone to stretch the field, and he's the guy to do it. But yeah, I think he's going to get closer to 10 touchdowns this year as well. He's just that big, and there's a lot of times it's just different. Big players sometimes struggle in the red zone from year to year. I think he got his struggles out last year, and this year is the year that he's going to jump back up into being a phenomenal red zone target.
And it could have just been because early on in the season, before they had Henry back, it was transparent who the red zone target was. You know what I mean? You said it yourself. Keenan Allen's a great route runner. He's a slant guy. He's a button hook kind of guy. He's not the guy that's going to pull defenses. So, and not notably, their biggest red zone target, especially when you look at teams after that 2018 season, kind of game scripting how the Chargers offense was going to work. It's not a secret that there's this 6'4" receiver that they have that caught 10 touchdowns last season. Let's keep an eye on that guy.
Yeah, and they didn't have Melvin Gordon for the first handful of games too, and it's
Great point.
another option. You don't have to stack the box. Austin Eckler, as good as he is, and he gets in the end zone, he's a small guy. When you get down to the red zone, there's not a lot of room to operate for a smaller guy like that. So yeah, defense is focused on Mike Williams, especially early in that year.
Yeah, so I'm with you. I'm expecting more of a 2018. I think you hit the nail on the head. Less yards, more touchdowns. I think that's what we can expect. 600 pass attempts from Philip Rivers. I would expect, regardless of who's at quarterback for this team, probably more of like that 450 to 480 range. Is probably where I have maybe 500, but I would not expect over 500 passing attempts for this team as a total offense. And when you're talking about 100 less pass attempts, even if it's a 50% completion ratio, that's 50 less catches to go around in that offense. So I think we could definitely expect those numbers to halt, but we want touchdowns more than yards anyway.
Yeah,
We would take 700, 800 yards if he's getting 6 or 7 more touchdowns.
exactly.
That's perfect. We'll take that all
And
day long.
And we got to expect, I mean, if this team isn't competitive and they're getting beat and beat and beat, I don't think that's the case because the defense is very good. But if they're not competitive, then yeah, they're going to throw more passes. But a competitive team with two quarterbacks that aren't known or won't air it out, you have a rookie and one guy who's never aired it out really in his career. You don't want we don't expect going into the season that they're going to be an air out team, even though Anthony Lynn has shown it throughout his career that he's top 10 in pass yards or passing attempts all 3 years. But this team is built a little bit different, and we get that, and we have to prepare for that. Unless it changes, unless Joey Bosa or Casey Hayward, people go down on this defense, and then they're playing from behind a lot, then maybe we'll change our thought. But going into the year, this is a team that's not going to air it out as much.
Yeah, I think that's to be expected. All right. I mean, I'm again with Mike Williams, probably a guy that's more FanDuel than DK. He's not a possession receiver. He's not a PPR kind of guy necessarily.
Yeah.
You're looking at those 3-4 catch games. Occasionally, he'll have probably like a 5 catch game here and there, but he's going to mostly, like you said, produce with the catches. Either whether it be his 20.4 yards per reception. If he gets 3 or 4 of them, he can still get you to 80 into 100 yards, or he's going to be the red zone target. So definitely a guy to keep on your radar. A lot of people tend to go towards and gravitate towards those number one receivers, but when you talk about talent level of a number 2 receiver, we touched on. I think you touched on the Falcons, Calvin Ridley, Mike Williams. Right there, as far as talent level, when you're talking about a great number 2, he's probably one of the better number 2s at a young age. We have some of these other stacked receiving cores around the league, but when we talk about youth and young, he's probably one of the better guys in that kind of category. So we'll transition to to everyone's favorite shiny toy late in the season for DFS. That's Hunter Henry. When he came back, played 12 games last season, 76 targets, 55 receptions for 652 yards, 5 touchdowns, 164 yards after the catch, and 488 before the catch. So why don't we talk about Hunter Henry a little bit? He kind of did step up as one of their red zone targets while Mike Williams struggled. 10 red zone targets in his 12 games for 7 catches and 3 touchdowns. So he's got some big playmaking ability. He's very athletic. Obviously, we saw his early season or his early career being derailed due to injuries, but he looks like he's back. He looks like he's ready for a full season, and he's a difference maker for them. You talked about top 10 tight end. I'd probably go even a little bit further. Gronkowski coming in the picture, he's probably not going to be a top 5 fantasy tight end necessarily, especially knowing that their passing offense is going to take a step back and there's so many weapons there. But I think on an actual NFL, skill point, he's probably top 6, top 7, and he could easily get there in fantasy as well. But what are your thoughts on Hunter Henry this season? Do you expect similar production that we can extrapolate over a 16-game season, or do you expect those numbers to take a hit a little bit?
First, this guy got to stay healthy. He missed all of 2018. We know, unfortunate. He missed 4 games last year. Came back quicker than a lot of people thought. But he's only 25 years old. He's oozing with potential if he can stay 16-game season. I know the downgrade in quarterback from Rivers, who loved tight ends, to the new guys now who's there now. It's going to dwindle everybody's numbers just a little bit. But if you do this, guys, you mentioned his numbers from last year. If you put it through a whole season, 16 games, 100. He would have had 101 targets, 73 receptions, 869 yards, and almost 7 touchdowns. That's a really good season. He was number 8 last year in tight end for tight ends. If played a whole season, he easily in the top 5. In all 3 years that he's played at least 12 games, he's been the 10th tight end. the 12th tight end, and the 8th tight end. So if he plays a 16-game season, there is no question about it. He's in the top 10. And the first 2 years, there was a guy, a prominent tight end on the
I
team.
think he was okay. He was okay.
Yeah, he was pretty okay. I forgot his name. Well, he's not that memorable, but
I think he was better at basketball, actually, now that I think about it.
yeah, he played at North Carolina. He was pretty good power forward, but yeah, we won't even get into him. But he was there for the first 2 years, and he was still a top 12 tight end both years. This guy, there's a lot of mouths to feed in this offense. That's why we kind of overlooked the wide receiver depth chart. I know they drafted a couple people. We'll get into the draft, but there's a lot of mouths to feed, and we don't expect a big passing offense. So it's going to be Keenan Allen, Hunter Henry, Mike Williams, Austin Eckler. They need to be fed first before we get anywhere else. But this guy's a top 10 tight end, and he's definitely the second best red zone option on this team. If they do what they did last year and double Mike Williams when they get to the red zone, which is probably going to happen, frees up a lot of space for Hunter Henry, who can get 6 to 10 touchdowns this year.
Yeah, I mean, when you just talk about like yards and touchdowns and overall stats, he'll probably be slightly behind Mike Williams. But when we talk about just a tight end doing that, that's pretty incredible. Yeah. I wouldn't be shocked if Mike Williams and him finish with similar yards and similar touchdowns at the end of the day, and the receptions are probably going to go more towards Henry. So talking about just on a per game fantasy option, he's a stud. It's just like you said, a lot of mouths to feed over there, and we're probably expecting that pass offense to take a step back, like we just said. Very bare minimum, probably 100 less pass attempts.
And Tyrod Taylor, we mentioned it. He's not a huge risk taker. Tight ends are perfect for a guy like that, and also a rookie quarterback. We used to always say tight ends are rookie quarterback's best friend. So Hunter Henry could easily play himself into a more prominent role with who he has at quarterback. I know Rivers loved the tight end, and they don't have him anymore, but these two guys are probably going to gravitate towards more of this big-bodied tight end, and there's not many people better than him or have the potential to be better than him out there at this position.
And now let me just say, we talked about Henry's health, and if he goes down, this isn't one of those situations where I'm like clamoring and jumping to get the backup. No, that's when we really look at Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, and Eckler getting a big boost. I mean, this guy gets his volume, not necessarily because of the system. And I think a lot of people might think that about the Chargers, how, Antonio Gates. No, they just happen to have two very good, athletic, fantastic receiving tight ends in a row. That's not the system necessarily. It's these guys. They're just that special. So, don't look for the next man up necessarily. If something does happen to him, look for the volume to be spread around more to Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Eckler. And that, that's probably how I would approach that. But, before we just jump into defense and then the draft and how they did, we'll just, we give a quick shout out and do appreciate you guys if you go give us a follow, subscribe to us all over the place. You can find us on YouTube, Stitcher, iTunes, Podbean, Spotify. We're all over the place. So it means a lot to us if you can do that. And if you can follow us on Twitter, I'm at Mike Apotria, MikeApotria. You can find Santino at Santino Caccone, SantinoCaccone. Means a lot to us, guys. I've been a little less active on Twitter, and that's just the telltale stages of life, man. I think we're both kind of working day jobs, Monday through Friday. Got some pretty long hours, and it's I've been taking the time right now, Santino, and I'm sure you've been doing the same with everything going on. Just putting the phone down a little bit, taking a step away from the computer, and spending some more time with the family and loved ones. So that's kind of been my approach. I've been using this whole COVID-19 as like my off season. Kind of recover the body a little bit, and get in touch with those that mean a little bit more to us. But we'll go right into the defense. I mean, we touched on it. We talked about it all over the place. We'll just touch on some of their big names. Obviously, they have some of the best defensive ends in the league, Joey Bosa and Melvin Ingram. Both those guys combined for 18.5 sacks last season. Between Nick Bosa and Joey Bosa, I'm going to go Colin Cowherd on this one. We could say they're some of the best brother tandems in the league, some of the most destructive brother tandems in the league outside of Earl Thomas and his brother.
What about the Watts?
Yeah, there's the Watts too.
I think if your last name's Bosa or Watt, you're all automatically really good at football. It's just weird how that happens. All three Watts are good.
they're cut from the same cloth, but the whole premise of that is I wanted to just stick in a nice little Earl Thomas joke real fast, like Colin Cowherd did. I'm not a big Colin Cowherd fan, but that was pretty funny. That was pretty. You got to give good television, and that was good television right there, radio. But it was fantastic. But both those guys stud. We talked about the corners between Casey Hayward, Chris Harris, two of the best lockdown corners in the league. Safety, Darwin James, fantastic safety, and then they draft Kenneth Murray as a linebacker just to help. And with those two signings that they had as well, they look like they have some good linebacking depth as well. I'm all about this defense. I think they're probably a top 5 defense in the league overall, in my opinion. They struggled with some of the rush on the ground last season. They struggled with rushing, but I think they made the improvements that they needed to take a step forward in that direction. I'm not going to go out and say that there'll be a top 10 rushing defense or anything like that, but I think they'll definitely be better than they were last season. So anything else you want to touch on their defense?
Yeah, so obviously last year we thought the Chargers were going to have a top 5 defense overall as well. The big thing about them, their pass defense got even better. They were already really good, and you add Chris Harris Jr., you only get better. And then, like you mentioned, they have two people who can really get off to the quarterback, and if they're healthy enough and they stay healthy, that's one thing. Lockdown corners and getting off to the quarterback, you don't want to play behind from this team if they're fully healthy. But struggling against the run last year, they tried to address it. They added Linval Joseph, big body, really good defensive tackle right there. And then they added Nick Vigil and Kenneth Murray in the draft. So I think they're going to be, hopefully they're better against the run. If they can control the ball, have a slight lead, force teams to pass, that's when they're going to make their money. And then this team will be one to be reckoned with if that's the case, because they'll be able to get after the quarterback and force turnovers, and they have lockdown corners. And I don't want to go against them, especially in a bad team. Bengals week 1. If you play a Bengal, I don't know how you could do that.
Yeah, Chargers defense seems like a lock for just one of the most expensive. And maybe it's not. And maybe that's something that we can keep an eye on, because the Joe Burrows factor, maybe they think like, oh, he's a good quarterback coming in here. He could carve him up. But no, the Chargers will probably be one of my favorite options for DFS in week 1. I think their defense is just going to, we're talking about a guy little offseason to prepare, doesn't really know the offense, rookie guy coming in against some of the best secondary. This has pick 6 written all over him. Yeah, pick 6 is written all over this. That or Joe Mixon's going to have a busy day. It's probably going to be one or the other. But I think we touched on the defense enough. They're going to be lights out. They're going to be fantastic. No reason to shy away from them. And as far as season-long guys, gravitate towards them. We'll go right into the draft. Pretty good draft overall, I think. We've seen them focus on a lot of skill positions. And that's mostly because I touched on it earlier. In 2021, they're expecting a lot of guys to come off the books and go elsewhere when, getting in there in age. So they're going to expect a lot of these guys, I think, from this draft and the next draft to kind of step up and take a hold of some of those positions. But first round, they had 2 picks. Justin Herbert, 6th overall, and then Kenneth Murray, linebacker, 23rd overall. Touched on both those guys a little bit. Murray's probably going to be used in several packages. Do you expect him to start?
I think he's going to start. It's very hard because this offseason is so much different than a normal offseason, and he doesn't have the playbook yet. Maybe he falls behind and doesn't start. But any other season, I would say this guy's going to start from day one.
Yeah, and that was kind of my take on it as well. I thought that he, looking at the depth chart, he'll probably be starting at some point or another. May not be right off the rip, but he's going to be used in plenty of packages, and he's going to find his way on the field more often than not, I think. Then we'll go to the 4th. They didn't have a 2nd, and they didn't have a 3rd round pick. Goes to the 4th round. Josh Kelly, you touched on him earlier. Anything else you wanted to add about him? I'm honestly not too clear about him. I read up on him a little bit, and just simply nothing really pops off the page as far as explosiveness or game-changing ability or anything. He was just a solid, productive back in college, and
I mean, he's a solid complementary back. I don't think he's going to take over Austin Eckler this year, but if he plays himself into a decent role, if Justin Jackson struggles again and Josh Kelly looks good when he's on the field, he'll get some carries, but he's not someone you're going to actively target unless there's an injury. Maybe in season-long leagues, you want to stash him in case Eckler's body can't hold a full season's grind, and then you get a guy who's going to be 1A or 1B, but in a fully healthy offense, he's not really someone I expect to make a big impact year 1.
Yeah, and even when you talk about a handcuff, it's probably Justin Jackson first, and then if something Jackson struggles, falls on his face, gets hurt, then we could start talking about Kelly. But not even going to sniff third down roll just with Eckler there. Neither one of
Yeah.
Jackson or him will sniff the third down, so there's really no reason to kind of have Kelly on your radar this early, unless you're talking about like dynasty stuff. But we're not doing that. The fifth round, Joe Reed, I know a guy that you're kind of excited to talk about, so I'm going to pass the torch over to you because I think you know a little bit more about him than I do. One of the two receivers that they took in the draft. So why don't you tell us a little bit about him?
Yeah, so again, this offense is not going to feed many mouths. So him and we'll get to KJ Hill after, but these guys have some talent, but I don't expect them to produce in year one because this offense is not an offense that's going to have 3, 4 wide receivers produce consistently. But Joe Reed's a speed guy. They have Mike Williams. This is probably he's faster than Mike Williams. He's a playmaking guy. He could bust out big plays from all over the field, and he could line up multiple positions. He could play. He could line up on the outside. He can line up in the slot. He can line up in the backfield. So he is a multi-dimensional talent, and he's an athletic guy with a ton of speed. So I do like his future prospects. But again, this year, it's just it doesn't look like it's in the cards for who they have at quarterback. And we mentioned their defense. Phillip Rivers had 20 interceptions last year and 8 fumbles. Tyrod Taylor does not throw that many interceptions, and he does not fumble like that. So they're not going to be put into bad situations where they're going to have to play and then have a guy like Joe Reed go out there and make throw or run a bunch of routes and make big plays for them. I see that a lot less this year. A very good talent, but not someone I'm looking at.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best example and perfect thing you could say. We're seeing a lot of these speedster guys go a little higher in the draft, and this was a loaded receiver draft, so he's a fifth round pick. We could have probably seen him be like a third or a fourth in another year, but I think everyone's out there looking for those speed guys, trying to find the next Tyreek Hill. Just seeing big play guys, and they're few and far in between. A lot of those speed guys necessarily don't have the same hands as Tyreek Hill, and I think that's one of the most underrated things that people don't mention about him is that he does have great hands as well. He's not just a fast guy, and he has pretty crisp routes. A guy
they
also
also don't have Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, that helps. I guess that helps a little bit. Tyrod Taylor is pretty close to now. Sixth round, we're 186 overall. Alohi. I love saying the name either way. Gilman, safety. Depth guy right now. I mean, they got Darwin Jones right now, and he's just an absolute stud as well. So I'm not expecting, to see anything much out of besides depth from him. Anything you want to say about him before we just keep it moving? It's a sixth round pick. Once you get to the sixth and seventh round, we're not going to have much to say at this point.
On a stacked secondary, he's just a depth option and future prospect.
Seventh round to 20, KJ Hill. You were just talking about him. Probably going to be behind Reed, but some exciting factors to talk about as far as his playmaking ability.
Yeah, so he's not as necessarily a playmaker, but he's a big possession guy. Kind of in the best case scenario, you have your second Keenan Allen when Keenan Allen either moves on or if he gets hurt. But I don't expect he's not a big red zone guy. He's not going to score a ton of touchdowns. He's not going to blow the lid off defenses. He's not speedy. He's not going to make those big plays. But he is a solid possession guy who gets open. He runs really good routes. Again, not someone I'm looking at this year unless there's a bunch of injuries because you just can't feed that many mouths on an offense that's not going to play like that. But he could potentially, best case scenario, turn into a Keenan Allen in a couple of years. So that's something to look forward to.
Yeah, a couple of years. 2021 is not too far away. So we're going to see some things change, I think, that year. But I think that's all we have. And look at that, 57 minutes, Santino, right on the nose, pretty much. So that gives us another 2-3 minutes to do our little outro. Maybe I'll take a jab real quick before we get off air. That way you have no time to respond, something really fast like that. But if you guys are listening and you're not already a member of our Discord, I would say, try it out, guys. Jump in. Right now we're freezing accounts. We're not charging anybody for any of the content and just our good overall banter that you get to pick up in our Discord. We have our nice fun contests going on a nightly basis. So they're competitive, and I would say jump in them, take your chance. And then once baseball, basketball, football season kick back up, when that does happen, we'll be producing some lineups, some cards, some great content, and really looking forward to that, man, because it seems like we're getting closer and closer, yet we're still getting pushed a little further and further away. But hopefully soon.
I really want them to doing these sims. There's some rhyme or reason, but most of it is 90% is just kind of stupid in The Sims, to be honest with you.
It- I get the
You
same
need
vibe.
real
I'm not.
sports.
I'm not a big fan of the simulation games either, just because it takes away my edge. It's random. Let's be real. I can't look into any of the, player matchups. I can't look into anything about pace or none of that matters. It's basically all just statistics, as what you're doing in probability when you're playing Sims. It's a very, very probability driven kind of oriented game. You're going by the chances and odds of this guy having a game with 30 or 40 or more points, as opposed to trying to pinpoint those games where you can get the 30 or 40 or more points, which is what I like to do. So that's all we have for you guys. I'll be back on tomorrow. Pretty excited. Of course, I'm always unprepared when it comes to the schedule. So, Santino, I don't know if you have it in front of you. If you don't, just look forward to a nice podcast tomorrow, guys. It'll be football
Uh,
again.
no,
Keeping it
I'm
busy.
not on.
Yeah, I know you're
I
not.
write down who I'm on and when I'm on, who I'm on with. But
Wouldn't be a show with us if we didn't fall off the rails at the end. So we'll end it right there, right on the hour mark. But we'll be back tomorrow. I know I have a show, guys, so I will be prepared, and it will be a good show. But that's all we have for you guys. Thank you for listening. Enjoy your weekend. If it's beautiful where you are, and go outside and enjoy it, because I think it looks like the sun's breaking, and that's what I'm going to do right now, Santino. So we'll talk to you later, guys. Thank you.